Hey everyone, Double A Tech Reviews here. Today I'm filming my Pixel 10 Pro review video. I've had this phone for a little bit over a month, actually, ever since it came out. I have a lot of thoughts on this device. Now, over the years, I've actually had a lot of phones, iPhones, Androids, Samsung, Nothing phones, etc. And what I find about the Google Pixel 10 Pro is that the build quality is actually quite comparable to something like an iPhone. It's not quite there. It doesn't actually feel like as good as an iPhone feels, at least to me in my hands, especially when it comes to like feel in hand, things like durability and things like that. Obviously not excluding the newest iPhone, since that one seems to have a little bit of problems with like easily scratching. But I did have the 9 Pro XL last year, and I can tell you that the build quality is very similar to that one. I would be careful about potential scratching along the line, since this is all just polished aluminum. And while it does look nice, I do find that it tends to scratch really, really easily. Even when I have it inside of a case, sometimes I found that I would find scratches on it, probably from either lint or sand or something that was in my pocket. I'm not really sure. But you can see here it has a really beautiful, very simple design, very reminiscent again of like, at least in terms of the square sides of like the iPhone design, obviously with its iconic camera bar here at the top. The entire time that I've used it, I've had it in a screen protector or in a case, but I have dropped it a couple times, and so far it's had no nicks or scratches or anything like that to report. It feels very nice in the hand, and so far at least I like the way that this phone has been in the past couple of weeks. Another thing I'll say about the design is if you're coming from a Pixel from last year, like a 9 Pro XL or a 9 Pro, or even a Pixel 9, you won't really find a lot of like improvements here, at least in the way of the design. You can see that the bezels still are around the same size that they were last year. In fact, I'm starting to kind of see them as maybe a little bit too thick, especially when you compare it to something like an iPhone. If you go to the Apple Store and you hold up an iPhone next to this phone, you'll start to notice the black borders around it. Again, it's not a big deal for me personally, but I know that this is $1,000 plus phone. Some people might care, so I thought I'd point that out. Moving on to the actual display itself, this year they did kind of improve the maximum outdoor brightness, I think to around 3300 nits. And I can tell you from living in Florida, where it's constantly sunny outside, at least when it's not raining, that the display is actually really, really easy to see outdoors. And really, no matter how warm it got outside, it never lowered in brightness or anything like that, which is something I have had to deal with in other phones, like some of my Samsung phones and my iPhones, where it gets really sunny outside and the screen starts to dim dramatically, probably to prevent the phone from overheating further. But needless to say, I think it's really good that it doesn't happen here. It's always bright and sharp. I haven't had any issues with visibility on all angles. Obviously, I'm rocking a screen protector here, but can't really complain about the screen. It looks beautiful, it looks vivid, videos look crisp, playing games look good on here. So speaking of the screen as well, I did want to point out that the in-display fingerprint sensor has been really, really fast and reliable. I would say my experience with the in-display fingerprint sensor has been really, really good. It's accurate most of the time. I've never really had any sort of failed attempts unless my finger was wet or anything like that. So moving on to the performance of the phone, this phone is rocking a Tensor G5, a custom Google CPU. Now, Tensor doesn't really score really good on pretty much any benchmark compared to modern flagship phones, even from last year. If you run Geekbench and Tutu or anything like that on, say, an iPhone 16 or 16 Pro, you're going to find higher scores on those phones compared to even this year's phones, let alone the new iPhone 17. Having said that, though, the actual look and feel of the software, like the performance, the fluidity, the animations, I haven't had any issues at all. The animations are slick and smooth. I've never really had any slowdowns or stutters or anything like that when it comes to navigating the UI. I haven't done something on here that made me think, wow, this phone is really slow or not worth $1,000. The experience is really smooth. The animations are really well timed and just really well thought out. Like you get subtle haptic feedback anytime you do something like pull down the notification center, scroll through your recents, hold down and on apps to get extra options. I think these are really nice touches. In terms of the actual software experience, this year it came out with Android 16, rocking a new Material Expressive redesign. That's what Google calls it. Basically, what I noticed that means is a lot of transparency and blur effects, whereas before this was entirely opaque. Same thing for the app drawer. You can see the app drawer, you can kind of see through it and it's blurred out a little bit. There's a lot of these cool like little animations and touches. For example, if I get a notification, if I don't dismiss it all the way and I let it go, everything around it kind of bounces. There's a lot of bouncy things, I will say that. So you can see here, for example, if I turn on this toggle here, it kind of bounces, it moves the adjacent tiles out of the way. And also changes the shape from a oval to a rounded square, which I think is pretty cool. It's a really nice touch. Moving on to gaming, I will say when it comes to games, like this phone isn't necessarily made for that. The Tensor this year is rocking something called a Power VR GPU. I know Apple used to use them in some of their old phones as a GPU vendor, but Google this year for some reason changed to that vendor, and benchmarks actually put this lower than last year's phone. And while it hasn't been necessarily bad at anything, like it can run things like Genshin Impact, at least my device can. I know there's been some reports of some Pixels for some reason not being able to run it, but I haven't had that issue. As well as emulation. I haven't had any issues with that, but I will say that the Pixel 9 Pro XL, which is the device that I was rocking last year as my main device, did produce more consistent performance. In other words, like when it did drop in performance, as all phones inevitably do, since they're phones, they don't have active cooling, the frame rate would kind of stay consistent, at least in the 40s or 50s, whatever the case may be, depending on the game. This actually fluctuates a lot more. It does get warm to the touch when I do play games. Like I was emulating a GameCube game earlier and I noticed that the phone was getting extremely hot. It was the same case last year. I will say when it comes to emulation performance for things like GameCube, PlayStation, Game Boy, like Game Boy games run here just entirely fine with no issue whatsoever. GameCube games, on the other hand, I noticed that with all the effects that I apply, anti-aliasing, increasing the resolution and things like that, I did notice that it did run better last year, again on my 9 Pro XL. I'm only making that comparison in case people are thinking of upgrading from the Pixel 9 series to the Pixel 10, just to know what to expect. This is a lot of money. Like my unit specifically is the 512 gigabyte version of this phone, because it did start at 128. I think it was like $12.99 for this phone. I'll put a correction on the screen if I'm wrong about the total price there, but needless to say, this is a very expensive phone, and I can see somebody not wanting this phone if they want to do something like hardcore gaming. Just because, like I said, there's so many other phones like the S25 Ultra or just the S25 series in general, at least here in the United States, that would probably perform a lot better when it comes to gaming than this phone that just came out. Not to mention as well, the iPhone with Apple Silicon usually has really good gaming performance, ironically enough, because, Macs aren't exactly known for gaming, but they do have options on iOS that you just can't find on Android when it comes to gaming. That aside, I would say like if you're a casual gamer and all you want to do is play like simple games or do emulation that isn't too intensive, like you're not trying to crank up the resolution, this phone is going to be just fine. You're not going to have any issues at all. And of course, doing things like scrolling through social media, watching YouTube videos, sending messages on a variety of different applications all work perfectly fine. I'm going to move on now to the artificial intelligence section, or the AI section of this review. The only reason I have an entire section dedicated to that is because Google heavily markets this as an AI first phone. And there are genuinely a lot of useful features on the phone itself that I feel like some phones either lack or aren't implemented just the way that the Pixel does it. There's a lot of cool things, like for example, if there's music playing in the background, there is an option to turn on a setting that will basically capture the audio and tell you what song is playing in case you don't know what it is. We've all had that moment where we're out in the mall or hanging out with friends in the car, a song comes on and you want to know what it is. Well, the Google Pixel automatically captures that, and typically it does it on device. It has like a small database that gets offloaded onto the device to try to detect some things. However, because it is on device, it may be limited as to how many songs it can search and things like that. So Google does give you an option to enable an extra setting where you can tap the button on the screen and it will actually then connect to the internet and do the traditional sound search that you can get with something like the Google app on the phone. Another cool feature that I found is all the spam detection and prevention features. So you can see here, like I have all my settings turned on for making sure that all my spam calls are automatically screened. And I can tell you that this works really, really well. This will automatically screen my calls in the background without interrupting me. So no notification, no full screen pop-up like you kind of get on the iPhone, even with the call screening that they have right now. And it will record the conversation and it will actually speak with the person on the other side. Things like, why are you calling? How can I help you? Just to kind of try to ascertain whether or not the person that's calling is actually a legitimate person trying to get a hold of you, or if it's a spam call. It actually also does real-time scam detection. Now, this was erroneously triggered on one of my calls, but to be fair, within the context of the call, it did kind of sound like a scam. So I can definitely see this working for a lot of people. I thought it was really cool when it went off, just because it was trying to protect me. At least the intent was positive. It does make like a kind of like a weird sound, and puts a notification icon up here that tells you, hey, this might be a spam call. And this happens entirely on device. Another thing that I found myself using a lot, especially when you make calls to like customer support or something like that, is call notes. This automatically just records the phone call and takes AI summarized notes for you, so you don't have to necessarily like always have a pen and paper with you handy if you do need to write something down or memorize something from a phone call. And also if you just want to record the call in general so you can have it for later reference. And of course, it does warn the other person that you are starting to record on the other side. One thing that Google really pushed a lot this year as a feature is something called Magic Queue. Magic Queue is basically supposed to be a personal and on-device intelligence that automatically suggests things and brings information to the forefront when you're doing things like sending text messages or calling customer support, doing Google searches, things like that. Unfortunately, in the entire month that I've had this phone, it hasn't really come up with useful suggestions. Honestly, most of the time, the suggestions that it gives me is if I copy something to paste it, which, you know, obviously if I copied something, it's more than likely because I'm going to paste it somewhere. But I haven't actually had a moment where, you know, I have some flights coming up actually fairly recently. I was talking about it via text message to my fiance, and, you know, unlike the demo that they showed off at the Google keynote where they announced this phone, it didn't prompt with any sort of information from my email. I do use Gmail, so all the information, you know, it should be accessible to the phone. Not saying that it's a bad feature, it's just not a feature that I have had work for me, at least not as advertised. I have called customer service, ironically Apple customer service, about an order. It did not, you know, service the order email, despite the fact that, again, it's all through Gmail and it does have access to it. So I think the concept and idea of Magic Queue is really powerful. And it kind of reminds me of like what Apple first advertised the more proactive Siri to be like. And I also like that it happens entirely on device. There is a feature that after a while, I had this on for like at least 3 weeks. I turned off just because I didn't realize it was on. Use data from recent screen activity. So I wasn't sure, you know, exactly whether or not this was also on device. And there are links here somewhere that tell you like the terms of service, privacy policy, and prohibited use and things of that nature. I still didn't kind of get an idea of whether or not the on-screen context or activity was on device like everything else. So I kind of turned it off. But at the end of the day, like, you know, on device, I have so many things. I put all my notes on Google Keep. All my emails go through Gmail. All my text messages, everything is on this phone. So, and also to be clear, I did have it on for 3 weeks. And as you can see, I do give it access to all the apps. So Google Keep, Contacts, Calendar, Messages, Gmail, all the software that I use on a daily basis to store my data and things like that. And unfortunately, it just didn't really pop up with anything useful. Having said that, I know that Google really likes to update their software in a very transformative way sometimes. So I'm hoping that in the future, this will become more powerful and more useful and be able to give you suggestions. Now, I want to talk about probably the main reason that people kind of gravitate towards the Pixel phone, the camera. Now, the camera this year is not really that much upgraded in terms of the hardware from last year's Pixel 9 series. I'm pretty sure it has very similar, if not to the exact same sensors as they did last year. Having said that, I feel like most of the charm with the Google Pixel camera is the software processing that it applies to a photo once it takes it. I found this year the photo processing isn't necessarily any faster really, and in some cases I felt like it was slower. I will have some sample photos and videos that I took during the day and some at night, just to demonstrate the camera in a variety of different conditions. And really the only new feature in terms of the camera software is something called Camera Coach, which is right here. It basically tries to look at the viewfinder of whatever it is you're trying to take a picture of and try to give you what it thinks are helpful suggestions. So you can see here that I clicked on one of the suggestions and it's going to try to tell me how to reframe the photo in a way that it thinks would look the best. To be completely honest with you, I found the interface to be a little bit counterintuitive. Like it wasn't really easy to navigate and go from step to step. But more important than that, that could just be an issue with me. Maybe I'm just not used to it. Maybe it's just not something that maybe I'm too dumb to understand it. I don't know. But one thing that I did notice is that the suggestions that it does give aren't really necessarily helpful if you already have a little bit of experience working a camera. So that's something to keep in mind. But I can definitely see this being helpful potentially for somebody that is fairly new to smartphone cameras or new to this camera system specifically. But for me personally, I didn't find it very helpful. The actual photo quality I found to be very similar to last year's, if not moderately improved. I will say that in terms of like skin tones, it has something called True Tone. So I am, not necessarily dark skinned, but I am not light skinned either. Maybe medium toned. I do have people in my life that are fairly dark skinned. In fact, you'll see one of them in the photo samples that I'll be providing in the video. And one thing that I did notice is that like the skin tones, just like last year, are really good. Like they did a great job tuning the camera for a variety of different skin tones, which I can definitely really appreciate. The video quality, on the other hand, is something that for me personally didn't seem that much improved from last year, if at all. Maybe the processing has gotten better. Maybe the color science has been improved a little bit. But if I take a video with this phone and I take a video with my iPhone, I'm going to probably choose the iPhone video most of the time. And I say most of the time because this has some cloud first features that I'm going to explain to you in a minute. So there's something called Video Boost where it essentially takes a video that you shoot, uploads it to Google Cloud, and does processing on it. And I noticed that when I do turn on Video Boost, in the cases where I can, is that the videos actually look really, really good. They probably look better than the iPhone videos. However, there's a drawback that one, the processing doesn't happen on device, so it has to be uploaded to the cloud. That being said, if you, for example, don't really have a lot of storage on your Google account, this may not be a useful feature for you. Again, really, really great. Like if you shoot a video with this, you let it do its thing. It depends how long the video is, how long it takes. Worst I've had is like a couple hours. I know when the feature first came out last year, I took a video and it took it like over a day to process a video and it wasn't even that long. So I can't really tell you like on average how long it would take. I'm sure it varies by depending on the video conditions and things like that. But it also has something called night sight video. It doesn't actually process on the device. Just like Video Boost, you take the video, and what it does is it's going to upload this to Google Photos and edit it in such a way that's going to really bring out all the dark areas in the photo. This obviously also requires Google storage in order to be able to upload to Google Photos and eventually have it processed. Even though this happens entirely on the cloud, this feature is exclusive to the Pro models, which is pretty cool. I don't really find myself using it that much, again, because like when you're shooting video, let's say you're in the moment, you have to remember to swipe over or to click this little icon up here, not the icon, oops, this icon down here and turn on Video Boost when you're recording. So you have to remember to turn this on basically, and it's a little bit out of the way. I wish they would put Video Boost on the base video mode here and maybe have toggles over here on the left that just let you toggle it on and off really easily instead of having to hide in a menu on the side here. Same thing for Night Sight video, although at least Night Sight has its own little slide section here in the user interface, but I still think it would look better, or not look better, but be more accessible or easier if it was just like one of these icons over here that I can just tap. But other than that, the video quality is by no means bad. Again, I'll have some samples attached to the video. But like I said, in my opinion, it doesn't really still compare to like a Samsung phone or an iPhone in most circumstances. Not to say that it takes bad videos, it doesn't. It actually takes really good videos. But if you're comparing phones, let's say you're trying to switch, or you're a content creator like things like TikTok or Instagram, or you're just a YouTuber or want to start a YouTube channel, I probably wouldn't recommend getting this phone for that purpose, especially if it's going to be your only device to do those things with. I have noticed that like if I try to shoot a video, let's say through YouTube Shorts on this phone, it doesn't really perform as well as if you were shooting it through the native camera. Now, this has kind of been the case on Pixel phones and some Android phones for a while now, but I thought by now they would have it ironed out. 9 times out of 10, if you take a video through the actual camera app versus a social media app, it's always going to look better coming straight from the camera than being recorded through a third-party app. So now I'm going to move on to battery life and charging. Now, the battery life on this phone for me has been great. I did have the Pixel 9 Pro XL last year, and I don't know if it's a placebo effect. I don't think it is at this point, just because I've had this phone again since it came out, so for over a month now. I think I find this normal Pro phone battery life a little bit better than my 9 Pro XL, at least with my usage. I'm not sure if I'm using it differently or if like maybe there's different signal strength at play here. I will say where I live, I don't happen to have the best signal. I know it has 5 bars, but the actual quality of the connection is not that good. If anything, I thought like since, you know, I'm home most of the time on Wi-Fi and LTE, that it would be worse here, but it seems to be better than my 9 Pro XL was last year. I would say I get about like 5 or 6 hours of on-screen time, and by the time I like go to sleep and I need to plug it back in, it's probably like 15-20% left charge. So that's not bad. Obviously, if I have a heavier day, like if I'm just playing games all day, just like most other phones, including the iPhone, you know, you're gonna have to plug it in before the end of the day. But I don't really have any sort of battery anxiety at all when it comes to using this phone day to day. I think this is a really good phone in terms of the battery life. I'm not saying that there aren't better phones out there. Of course, you know, I think the iPhones 17s that just came out have been tested to have better battery life than this phone. But at least for me, when it comes to the actual endurance of the phone, I've had no issues. Charging, on the other hand, has only been moderately improved. I think they increased the wattage at which you can charge compared to last year. But by far my favorite feature of this phone and the biggest improvement is something called Pixel Snap. Pixel Snap is basically Qi 2, which is the newest wireless charging standard with a magnetic array. So basically, any MagSafe accessories that you may have, let's say you're considering switching from an iPhone, all your MagSafe accessories will just work. So it just magnetically attaches. In this case, this is a first party stand that Google made. They only make it in this color, which just so happens to match the phone color that I picked, which is Moonstone, but it does kind of contrast with other colors. Like for example, you can see my case here that I chose, it does kind of like contrast a little bit. The reason it's my favorite feature is because there's a variety of different like already existing MagSafe and Qi 2 accessories that you can take advantage of. I did buy their official Qi 2 magnetic puck for my phone and its stand, and I can tell you it's been great. When I go to sleep, I don't have to fiddle around with the USB-C port anymore in the dark. I just find the charger and it snaps in, which I find extremely helpful. If you're not really a person that has any MagSafe accessories, I would recommend, if you get this phone, to at least try some. I can't tell you how helpful I found this. I genuinely didn't think I was going to use this feature at all, but once I found like a really cool accessory like this one, and I do have other stands as well, I mean, you know, like let's say you're waiting somewhere, or you just have some spare time, you can just set down your phone, lay it back, watch a video, play a game, whatever it is that you do, or you can just attach, you know, Bluetooth connect something like a PS5 controller and play games while it's up on the stand. Having said that, the actual charging speeds of the Qi 2 wireless charging on this phone are Qi 2.0 instead of Qi 2.2. I think that's the official version, compared to the 10 Pro XL, which is a larger brother of this phone. The reason for that, I think, is because the bigger phone has more space to dissipate heat. So the larger one of these two, the Pixel 10 Pro XL, can charge a little bit faster through Qi 2 wireless charging compared to this one. I wouldn't say that charging through Qi 2, like, or the MagSafe accessories, whatever you want to use, the Pixel Snap accessories, is necessarily fast. It's not slow, but it's not fast. So if you're in a rush or anything like that, I would definitely recommend that you just get yourself a 45-watt charger, like the official one that Google sells through their store is the one that I use, to top up if you need to do that in a really fast fashion, or if you're in a rush to go somewhere. But typically, like I said, the battery life on this phone has been really, really good. I've never had to worry about not lasting until the end of a workday or anything like that. All right, I'm going to end off the review by talking about the price and the value proposition of this phone. When I sat down and reflected on whether or not this phone would be worth $1,000, or in my case, I think $1,200 or $1,300 because of my storage configuration, I kind of sat at a crossroads. only because not that this isn't a good experience. I think it's a fantastic experience, especially if you're new to Android. This is probably the most iPhone friendly phone that there is on the market, not in terms of specs or performance, but in terms of experience, like how easy it is to set up, how easy it is to navigate, how simple the user interface is, how smooth it is, and stuff like that. And the fact that the updates come really quickly. Speaking of updates, one thing that I feel like not a lot of people talk about in the reviews is software updates and just how long the phone is going to be supported for. The reason that I say that is because I, for example, just because I can, and I like, having the latest technology, I buy typically the new phone every year, right? So I've had all the Pixels from, 6 through 10 now, and that's an expensive hobby to say the least, and I know not everyone can afford or even wants to. You shouldn't have to pay $1,000 or even $800 every year to update your phone. Google does have 7 years of software update supports, and having been a Google Pixel user all the way back from the Pixel 1, actually, I know in recent years they started doing what they used to call Pixel feature drops. I think they're just called Pixel drops now, but essentially every couple of months, I think every 3 or 4 months, I have to look and make sure, but either way, every couple of months they do what they call a pixel drop or a feature drop. And basically what that means is the Google Pixel team actually comes up with really useful new features that they push to all their Pixel phones. Now, some of them obviously are locked behind hardware if it's like hardware specific, but most of the time you'll find that even on older Pixel phones, when you get a feature drop, you get some genuinely nice new features that can actually affect the way you use the phone, even though it's a phone you already have. So I feel like it's one of the few phones out there that like genuinely gets better, at least in terms of the experience over time, at least from my personal experience. For example, if you have like a Samsung or an iPhone, you have to wait until the new version of the operating system comes out. Like for example, from One UI 6 to 7 and now 8, there was a big visual redesign, and from iOS 17 to iOS 26, or I think it was iOS 16. I don't see, they changed the numbers, now I got all confused. But the point is, iOS 26 introduced liquid glass design, and that was honestly probably the biggest feature of the operating system update. Pixel, on the other hand, every quarter you can find yourself being genuinely happily surprised by a transformative feature added to your phone well before a new version of Android ever comes out. So I think that's pretty cool, and it does add to the value proposition. But going back to that, this phone for me cost over $1,000, and that's a lot of money for a lot of people. And I would say at this price point, I can't necessarily say that I would pick this up if I wasn't already a fan of the Google Pixel and the line over something like an iPhone 17 or a Samsung S25. It's hard for me to justify this price point simply because you're not really getting the best of the best, right? And what I mean by that is, if you want to play games on your phone, you're probably going to find the experience you're lacking compared to something like an iPhone or S25. You're probably going to not find the video performance, especially on social media apps, to be up to the standard of something like an iPhone if that's where you're coming from. This isn't by no means a bad phone. I think this is a great phone for most people. I would just say that if you were considering the Pixel 10 Pro XL, that maybe you look at something like the Pixel 10, which starts at $799 and is a little bit cheaper than this one. Not a little bit, a lot, $200 cheaper than this one, and you get most of the same experience considering that it has the same processor, a similarly bright screen. The only real sacrifice that you'd be giving is like the main and ultra wide camera as well as the zoom camera. So the cameras on the back are going to be slightly downgraded, and the zoom range is not going to be as good. I think for the average person, if you look at the Pixel 10 and you take photos side by side with the Pixel 10 Pro, you're not going to find much of a palpable difference. This phone is really great and the experience has been awesome, at least for me. I just don't really think it's worth $1,300. If I were to pick up, let's say, an iPhone 17 Pro for, $1,100, $1,200, however much the starting price is, you get the best video camera on a phone. You get, a really, really good performance. But I feel like for that price, you can probably get something better with another company in terms of raw performance, third-party video performance. And again, if you're a social media content creator or an influencer, you might find that a little bit of a deal breaker for you. It's not bad by any means. I think this is a great phone for most people. I would just keep the price in mind. Also, as of the making of this video, October 11th, if you go to the Google store, you can actually pick up last year's 9 Pro XL for $200 less than it was when it first came out. I think that's also a great deal to consider if you're considering this phone. Given that I did have the 9 Pro XL last year, and I'll upgrade to this slightly smaller form factor, which is just a normal 10 Pro, I would say my experience was pretty much almost one-to-one, with the exception of slightly better battery life and the Qi 2 or the MagSafe magnet arrangement, which again I think is really cool and really handy. You could probably find a really good similar experience to this phone with the 9 Pro, the 9 Pro XL from last year, and save yourself some money. But overall, I would say this phone is really good experience and worth the buy, especially if you're upgrading from an older phone, or even if you're trying to switch from iOS to Android. There might be some things that you might be missing out, but I think for the most part, it's been a joy to use this entire time. I will, of course, make any update videos if anything changes about the situation, like with software updates or anything like that. But for now, this has been my review of the Google Pixel 10 Pro. Thanks for watching.